Parents of a young teacher who took his own life while struggling with a gambling addiction have described the government's response as disappointing and inadequate.
Jack Ritchie was only 24 when he died 5 years ago. And in March, a coroner ruled that he'd been failed by woefully inadequate warnings and treatments.
The government has now promised a comprehensive review of gambling laws, but Jack's parents, Charles and Liz, say more urgent action is needed. Thomas Morgan reports.
Jack Ritchie began gambling with his friends as a teenager at school. He quickly became hooked, so he self-excluded himself from the local betting shop along with the help of his parents, but then the addiction went online. After 7 years of betting at just 24 years of age, Jack took his own life, blaming himself for his addiction. The type of gambling Jack was into was the most addictive. Nearly half of all people playing online casino games and slots are addicted or at risk. And more than 400 suicides every year in England alone are due to this issue. Earlier this year, a coroner ruled that the information about the dangers and associated treatments available were woefully inadequate to Jack. And senior coroner David Urpith added Jack did not understand that being addicted to gambling was not his fault.
Well, Jack's parents, Liz and Charles, are here with us on the sofa now. Thank you so much for coming in to talk about Jack. Obviously, we just saw Thomas' report there. Tell us a little bit more about Jack and what type of boy he was.
Oh, he was great fun and a great friend. All his friends talk about how much they loved him. He was a big guy. He was 6'3", and they all talk about his big hugs. And he was friends with so many different groups in Sheffield. He was the kind of person who you would want to have around because he made things more fun.
I wonder if being the guy that everybody relies on,
it's true.
You know, a big chap physically and a big character, I wonder whether that made it more difficult for him to seek help.
I think what made it difficult for him to seek help was the messaging that happens and that the coroner rightly saw and rightly pointed out, and that the government doesn't seem to be listening to, frankly. You know, the message is that everything is an individual's fault, that stopping the harm is down to the individual, and that it's not part of the system. Unfortunately, what the government seems to be saying and what they've said to us is that the current system that killed Jack is going to go on.
But also, I mean, Jack did reach out for help and seek help, saw medical professionals. They didn't know the dangers of gambling either. So it wasn't just Jack, it was the whole system is flawed.
I mean, the point is that if you have a system that has voluntary funding by the very companies that cause the harm, they can put their money where they want and move it whenever they want if the messaging gets too close to home. And what's close to home is the link between the products and the health harm. Like cigarettes, like tobacco, they will do anything to stop that link. And the best way of doing that is saying, well, it's individuals who are addicted and they have to do something.
So in a sense, what they're doing is the addict is being asked to take complete responsibility.
Exactly.
And that surely can't work, can it? I mean, Charles,
no, it really misses the whole thing around addiction. And as Liz says, what you have is some incredibly addictive products, as addictive as heroin. And what we're expecting is that people will somehow know that. When Jack started gambling, he thought it was a bit of fun because that was the only messaging that there was about gambling. Nothing about impact on mental health, nothing around suicide. And that is sadly what Gambling with Lives have had to do.
And the current charity, Gamble Aware, they can say what they want, waffle on about being independent. And I'm sure they'll say so at some point. You may well have a comment from them. But the reality is that if the industry, if the companies can move their funding, if the message gets too close to home, then they can't afford to really be clear about the products and the real cause of the damage.
So what do you need to happen? What do you want?
Well, we think there has to be a statutory levy. It's absolutely fundamental.
And just explain what that means, a statutory levy.
Well, it's a levy on the products it's a levy on the profits, of the gambling companies that is mandated by the government. It means that they can't just suddenly withdraw it. They insist, the government says this has got to happen. And then the government can direct it into the state organisations that are used to delivering treatment and delivering education and information. I mean, how ludicrous is it that people going into our schools have voluntary funding from the industry that causes the harm? Would we have this from tobacco now? We probably used to, but we don't anymore, do we?
Is that what it feels like? Does it feel like you're fighting the kind of campaign that decades ago was being fought against cigarettes?
Absolutely.
It feels like actually the gambling industry is playing the tobacco industry playbook. They influence research, they influence messaging. I mean, the smoking industry at the start played that actually smoking was good for your health. And we still have the gambling industry, which actually is portraying this as a bit of fun, and there is no research funded by them which makes that link between
And the
mental
Belgian
health.
government only last week said this is the new smoking, and they introduced more stringent laws. When's our government going to do that?
Belgium has banned gambling advertising, and that's the sort of measure, it's that scale of measure that this government needs to do.
The Betting and Gaming Council have given us a statement this morning, and they're talking, about any suicide being a terrible tragedy. And they say that 30 million people in the UK enjoy a bet each year. The overwhelming majority do so safely. And they're talking about the amount that they're committed to spending an extra £100 million for the treatment of problem gambling, what they've already done with messages, and say we're committed to going even further and strongly support the government's gambling review.
But saying that most people gamble safely is actually a recipe for increasing the suicides. Because
How?
Because it pretends that all gambling is the same and that all gambling is safe. And the reality is,
the change in regulation are focused on the most dangerous product. We're not talking about major change around the national lottery or horse racing or whatever. It is the highly addictive electronic online casino games, and those are the products which have addiction rates, at-risk rates of nearly 50%. That is where the regulation needs to happen. So those products need to be made safer. You'll remember that back in 2019, the stakes on the fixed odds betting terminal was reduced to £2. Now that was really important because that was the first time that government has said, not about all gambling, but there are some products which are just too dangerous to be on our high street in their current form. That needs to happen with online products as well.
How frustrated are you that hasn't happened already?
People will die.
What it feels like is the government have not grasped the scale of the problem, and what we worry is that they are going to tinker around the edges, so there'll be something around advertising. They'll ban shirt front advertising, and they won't do anything around the football grounds or wider advertising. They'll introduce stuff on affordability checks, but they'll do that at a level which is just not high enough to be preventative. If you have, an affordability check at about £500 losses per month, Jack would have not been picked up through that until he had a deep and serious addiction. You've got to set things at a level which would be preventative.
It pretends it's safe doing this, and that's what Jack thought. Jack went into the bookies with his friends at the age of 17, and he thought it was as advertised, a bit of safe fun. He didn't know his life was at risk. On that last day when he died, he didn't wake up in the morning think, this evening I'll be dead. He had no idea that what he was doing was going to kill him. We have to tell people.
And your lives now are utterly committed to this. I mean, is this basically a full-time job for you?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And many other families. I mean, we have many people who refer to us.
I think that was the shock to us when Jack first died, is that gambling suicides were not an issue. They were just not in... you didn't read about them. What we discovered within weeks, really, of Jack dying was just how many other families had been affected and how many just ordinary young people were taking their lives. And the thing about them is as well, they were just ordinary, normal, happy people where gambling was their single problem. It wasn't mental health issues, it wasn't masses of debt, it was what gambling does to your mental health.
Charles, Liz, thanks so much for coming in and talking about Jack, but also talking about what you've learned and what you're campaigning for since.
Thank you.
The government carrying out that review at the moment, and they've said us in a statement to us this morning that they're undertaking the most comprehensive review of gambling laws in 15 years to make sure they are fit for the digital age, and we're expecting that in the coming weeks. And of course we will keep across it for you here on Breakfast.
And if you've been affected by any of the issues raised this morning, you can find help and advice at bbc.co.uk